Happy Saturday, everybody. I hope you're all having an awesome weekend. So this is the second day in a row where I get to scratch a movie off my list that was creating buzz, but I was unable to watch for one reason or another earlier on. And it just became available to watch for free on TUBI, just as an FYI, and I'll leave the TUBI link down in the description. The movie I'm referencing, of course, is the horror thriller Candyland, directed and written by John Swab. John Swab is a filmmaker I'm not overly familiar with. I think he's been doing his thing for a few years now. But he certainly makes a fan out of me with this one because this is an absolutely top-notch horror thriller with a perfectly authentic, very lived-in atmosphere, drenched in sleaze and grit, and an overall vibe that really reminded me of some of those cool neo-noir Western movies that we were getting in the early 90s from guys like John Dahl or the Coen brothers. Movies like Blood Simple or Red Rock West. This movie evokes that same skeezy atmosphere of dread perfectly. It revolves around a small-time prostitution ring that runs out of a roadside motel by a truck stop. You really feel the element of isolation that has set in for these people because of their profession. There's almost no extras, and you don't really glimpse a whole lot of faces outside of the main cast. Even the Johns are anonymous for the most part. And it squarely reinforces the notion that all this group has essentially is each other. This, combined with the fact that they're all well cast and rather likable, makes them very easy people to gravitate towards and care about. Also, while I'm touching on the fact that these roles all feel very well lived in, I may as well mention that the movie is very frank and full frontal in its depiction of the sex trade and all the hazards and ills that come along with that. I'm not going to go into any detail, but come on, you don't have to be a genius to really figure it out. And with that in mind, you probably know if this movie is for you or not. Obviously, that's going to put some people off for a whole multitude of perfectly legitimate reasons. Although if you're even bothering to look up a review for this movie, you're probably the kind of person who has a bit of a stomach for it anyways. Anyway, the prostitution ring seems to operate in this delicate bubble of denial and resignation until a young girl named Remy, who has seemingly become estranged from her family's religious cult, ends up wandering into their lives and into their profession. Remy is very well played by Olivia Luccardi. Some of you will probably recognize her from Soft and Quiet or It Follows. And here, for some reason, she really gave me a lot of the young Juliette Lewis vibes. Just an unpredictable, sparking live wire who, in this case, is completely convincing in more ways than one. And that's all I have to say about that. For all the frank depictions of sex and nudity in the film, that omnipresence and the general raunch and sleaze is all there to help us probe more deeply into these characters' lives and what they're going through, rather than simply sensationalize them. You're meant to experience this all as they experience it, rather than being a fly on the wall. John Swab's script is remarkably well structured. There was more than one point where I thought I kind of had the movie pegged in terms of what the direction was going to be or what a reveal was going to spring on me. And at every point, the movie proved me wrong. And then also proved me right in weird ways at the same time. That sounds kind of awkward, I guess, but honestly, one of the best and most sincere compliments that I can give this movie is that the poster, the premise, the title, it all seems to suggest one kind of movie. And in some ways, Candyland is that kind of movie, but it's also very much an antithesis to the kinds of movies it's inspired by. This is one of those movies where my appreciation for the screenplay grows and grows the more I think about it now that it's done. Honestly, the only real point that I can kind of dock this movie on a writing level is the ending. The tension and intrigue is building exceptionally well for most of the movie, and then without spoiling anything, I'll just say that when we get to the ending, it just sort of feels like it's something we arrive at, rather than going out with any kind of a punch or a bang or something to really leave you feeling slack-jawed. At least that's what I was hoping for the way things were going. Or maybe it was just that music cue. Again, I'm going to be vague because I don't want to spoil the movie, but the way that it ends involves a cue to a song, and I'm almost wondering if maybe it was just the wrong choice of song. I will just say it got a reaction out of me, but I'm not sure that it was quite what the moment needed. Maybe if they had chosen a different tune or scored it differently or just left music out at all and let that ending play out on its own, I think that honestly could have been kind of a haunting way to do it. I mean, whatever, I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone else how to edit their movie all day. I'm just saying I'm not sure this was the high note that you really would want a movie like this to end on. Tonally, it just felt off to me, and in some ways a little bit derivative of the ending of Breaking Bad. In fact, I would even say the influence of Breaking Bad and Vince Gilligan is all over the cinematography of this film, and I say that as a compliment. The way that they helm all the seedy motels and truck stops and all the neon lights and the cars whizzing by, that gritty, saturated look would be right at home in any episode of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul. There's one shot in particular that involves the camera moving steadily through the back of an ambulance and looking out through the windshield to end it, and fixing on one particular character for a significant length of time. And the way that it's executed and acted by the characters involved, it ends up kind of being one of the best shots and moments along those lines that I can think of in recent memory. Some of Swab's instincts around the cinematography are a little bit more ill-advised. Here and there, there's shots that are obviously meant to be artful, where we're looking through some sort of surface or smudgy window or something that kind of obstructs the characters, but instead it just kind of comes off pretentious and distracting. But that's a nitpick. For the most part, he's very good about knowing when to keep the shots conservative or when to stylize them a little bit more. When the lurid imagery really kicks in the third act and John Swab and his camera crew really let their freak flag fly, let it all hang out, it's introduced at a very deliberate and calculating time, because it's sort of the point where things start tipping from thriller territory into full-on horror film. Honestly, despite the subject matter, I feel like this could be a good gateway film for people who are maybe on the fence with horror or don't usually delve into horror. Maybe if you're more a fan of Coen Brothers films or sort of neo-noir or just good lean thrillers and you don't necessarily mind when they go into really dark territory, this is a movie that is probably right up your alley. If you're a pure horror fan, while this movie doesn't necessarily ladle on the gore like a pure slasher does, between the atmosphere and a few other surprises that I won't spoil, I have a hard time fathoming that any hardcore horror fan would leave this one feeling like they were still thirsty. You'll know what I mean if you watch it. It's not gory per se, but it's still, nevertheless, it's a mean, nasty little flick. The other thing I want to mention before I wrap up the review is that I actually really enjoyed William Baldwin's performance as the sheriff in this movie. Again, without getting too specific, I'll just say that I really admired the way that he was able to make this guy feel human, even though this is a character that not much of anyone, I think, could really get behind and defend. He's not a good guy. That's all I'm going to say. But while he might not be a good guy, he is still very human. And the way that William Baldwin manages to sketch in all these little nuances with what is a very leanly written supporting role is honestly terrific. His performance elevates the character to a level that honestly it probably didn't need to in order to function for a movie like this. Yes, I know it's late in the year, so I'm sure many of you have already seen Candyland, but if you haven't yet, if you're on the fence, or you haven't heard about it, or you looked at it and thought it maybe wasn't for you, across the board, I would encourage you all to check it out. I went into this with no particular expectations and came out the other end with my thriller itch scratched more thoroughly and successfully than it has been in, forever. This is way better than I thought it would be, and a very welcome breath of fresh air. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Hope you all have an awesome Saturday night, and look for more content coming your way really soon. Peace.